Good morning, BT and Priya. Thank you so much for talking with me. I watched this place, and as an immigrant, I moved here in 2009. That film really resonated with me because it talks a lot about loneliness and abandonment, but from the perspective of being in a community but still feeling like you're not a part of it because you're not connected to your homeland. So for both of you, what was it about this particular story that resonated with you that made you, BT, want to work with Gumana Hode and to co-write the script with her, and for you, Priya, about getting involved with the film and playing Malay?
I mean, for us, both of us are Tamil, and from what the world knows as Sri Lanka, I think that's the most diplomatic way I can put it. Yeah. But we're both Tamil, and our parents arrived here, our families arrived here as part of a displaced community, and so I think that experience of being in a new place, not by choice necessarily, is something that's always informing our lives. I would say that for you too. Yeah, I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like it's always informing our lives, and so I think that story was always in me. And Gulshan also, as a refugee herself, who's another one of the co-writers from Iran, like that part of our experience was always informing everything that moves forward, and so. It felt only natural to kind of start there with the first feature, and I think a lot of filmmakers start by doing something very personal, and I think that's what we did. And with Debbie involved, Debbie Jacobs, with her family, she is Mohawk, and Ginikahaga from Ganawage outside of Montreal, but her character in the film is mixed race. So what does it mean to look at it through the lens of I have a father from somewhere else and I have a mother from here, and what does that mean for my identity? So we wanted to explore that kind of immigrant refugee experience through multiple lenses was really critical.
I think it's really interesting how you described it as a sense of loneliness even within your community. The people I spoke to haven't seen it like that, or else they haven't said it. And for me personally, reading the script and it being this place, play on displaced, I moved from Toronto in 2009, partly because I felt lonely or alienated because of many different reasons, one being poor. I think you feel that in capitalist society, and where I've lived elsewhere, feeling that sense of that desire to have or be a part of a community but not have that. And it's interesting because after being in the film, it made me really think about what communities am I a part of, and almost wanting and yearning for that. So that really connected me with the script. There's a lot more things that resonated with me with the script and my reality.
Yeah, I think the film I think you guys do a very good job of showing there's different types of loneliness and exclusion within community, because this film is also the second film that I've seen where it mentions or refers to the Oka crisis, which happened in 1990. And for a lot of people, especially a lot of immigrants, they move to Canada in particular thinking Canada is a utopia. And I always say Canada is not a utopia. Canada has a lot of racism, a lot of xenophobia, especially towards the indigenous people. And the first one that I saw there was Beans. Beans talks about the Oka crisis from a more personal perspective, but this kind of shows the external where what would have happened for people who were living outside the Mohawk community at that time. And the choices they had to make: do I stay where I am, or do I go back home where my people and my land is being challenged? And it's interesting that you have the father who says, I left Iran because of conflict, and I came here and there's conflict too. And it's interesting because a lot of people, when they leave, a lot of immigrants and refugees, they flee to Canada as a refuge. But then they're not thinking of how Canada itself has a lot of issues for indigenous people as well for other people of color. I think a lot of immigrants don't do research about how racism is permeated through Canadian culture and how capitalism affects immigrants, because when you move here, you experience racism. I've experienced racism as an immigrant here. And I always tell people, research, don't just come here and think everything's all hunky-dory, because Canada has done an extremely good job of PR marketing. And for the both of you, the film kind of touches on that because we have the perspective of the father, but then also of the mom who's this is a problem in our community. And so for both of you, how did you go about when you were going through production? Did you guys have any discussions about how those topics were being handled in the film, and your own experiences as well?
I mean, I think we were all on set, all the writers were on set. Debbie was one of the writers and also played Gauniosta herself, and it's a constant conversation that was happening, even the first day of set, the rituals that we did, the conversations that we had, the note that I had for the crew maybe was, you know, foreign to what was, or ignorant really to what was going on for the people involved in the communities focused on in the film. It was a constant conversation. We were having conversations in makeup chairs, in hair, in art direction. Costume designers were talking. The costume designer, Charlene, she was talking to everyone about their specific culture. So there was a constant learning and effort to learn in that process, and I think that was really critical. But
and that was so natural.
So natural.
Just happened.
Yeah, you guys were having conversations in makeup chairs, like you and Debbie were having conversations, you were saying, you know, off camera. And I think like we just really wanted it to be a space and a set where that conversation was possible. And I think because all of the writers were on set a lot, like we were able to answer people's questions, and we had done so much work writing on it. And it's not ever enough, the work is always going, but spending 4 years together writing a script, having intimate, vulnerable conversations about your own communities, your notions about each other, or lack of knowledge about each other, I think creates this kind of trust and for a Top Gun to keep having those conversations and to invite other people into that conversation. So I think it's been a journey, and I think what happened on set was reflective of what had happened in our writer's room for 3-4 years.
For me, reading it off the page, it was written in a way where you can't help but ask certain questions, or you can't help but like wonder, oh, you know, why is this here? Why are they having this conversation? It's just there. And I think they did a really good job of that. Reading the script, I knew I want to be a part of this. I want to be a part of Nayani's production and everyone else who's involved, because you know that if they've written this, you know they're going to film it and it's going to be produced in a particular way where you can feel like comfortable to have those conversations. So I think y'all did a really good job with that.
And I think the goal of the film, I appreciate it. The goal of the film was so that people would have conversations as a result. Like you mentioned the scene with the father, like we wanted him to say that because there are so many of us who come here and we don't, like you said so well, like don't know the history here and also don't understand how our histories are tied and those legacies are connected. It's not saying they're all the same because they're definitely not, but that, you know, imperial colonial experience that we have all we've all went through and our communities have connects us, and I think we have responsibility to be in solidarity with each other and to understand and learn about each other. And that's what this film really, where it started, was like, how do we figure out a way to be in better relationship and solidarity, and so then what kinds of questions and stories do we build around those questions?
Right. And like the main part of the film is the burgeoning romance between Malaya and Gonahoste. Yeah. But I think it was really important that their first discussion is about their own preconceptions about each other racially and culturally, because I thought it was so interesting that Malaya, she says, "Oh, I didn't realize that you were indigenous or Mohawk," and she was like, "I thought you were like Iranian." Kind of like the lady in the supermarket thought that Gonahoste was Iranian as well, and then she also thought that she didn't know about Sri Lanka or Tamil, and she was like, "Oh, I thought you were Indian." And the thing that clicked in my head is how for a lot of people of color in particular, we have preconceived notions of what each other look like culturally because of, put it strictly, white perceptions of people of color in media. They present Native Americans and First Nations people looking one particular way, and then when you meet them, you're like, "Oh wait, you guys cover a whole range of phenotypes and looks variously, as well as for South Asians and Southeast Asians."
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned, I have like just an anecdote, like when we were writing, Gulshan brought up this story about her dad and her uncles, like, and I think that's the same case for people around the world, saw country western movies, right? US country western movies. So a lot of people's first introduction, racialized people around the world, folks of color, was to indigenous people in this land, in Turtle Island, was country western movies, which are inherently at that time very racist and wrong. They weren't accurate. And so, like, if that's your first introduction and you don't know what you're walking into, like, I know my parents came here and they thought this was just a British, a descendant of a British country, which it was, but they didn't understand, an extension, and they didn't understand that there were people here first, just like they were there first in their own place, you know. And I think, and so I think it begs everyone to ask a lot of questions about, like, what do we not know about each other? Where are we learning about each other? What's our first learning point? And also not just have conversation with each other and, you know, with our own generation, but I hope that elders, in different communities of color and indigenous communities watch this so that they can understand maybe like some of the conversation pieces and history that they're missing.
Like how many people know that we're on stolen land and acknowledge that and understand what that means every single day.
Exactly, especially I think for immigrants, because for a lot of immigrants, like they're fleeing their own countries because of turmoil. And they're fleeing their countries, especially like from Malay's character. Like she kind of has that same background and connection. They're going to host it. Like they're both like their identities and their cultures are from countries where they're in conflict with each other. And do you think that was important for them to have a first conversation? Because like I think that was such a good way for kind of like to clear the air for them as not only as friends but also as lovers and as girlfriends and people who've been in each other's lives for years. Because a lot of people when they first meet and if they're getting into romances, they're like, you just do surface level stuff. But their first conversation is like pretty deep if you really think about it. So do you think that was important for like creating like a solid foundation for the relationship?
I think so. Like they didn't meet off of Tinder or anything. It was genuine and natural. And I think that there are people who do have those conversations, and they're both warm-hearted, thoughtful people. With both the characters, they have a lot of depth to them. So it's only natural that they would have that conversation. And I think it's an interesting one too, not to generalize, but I think like in the Tamil community and for a lot of different types of refugees and immigrants coming here, you're here, it's your safe haven, you made it, you take a deep breath, you do the 9 to 5, you put your head down and you carry on without actually realizing what is happening on this land, what has happened. So that conversation was so important, I think, and very well written in that we're showing people, this is it. This is a found without saying.
What are we complicit in, right? By pretending that it's not happening or not learning, choosing not to learn about it. And that scene in the shisha spot, it actually was supposed to be the second meetup, and we added. People will see the movie. We added another scene between. We're like, maybe we don't get there just right. You know, we need to see like there's an attraction, there's like a spark, an energy between them. But that scene, we talked about it last night with the other writers. I was with them, and we just we worked on that. It probably took us the longest, that one scene, because we were also afraid of what we were saying, right? We're like, there are some lines in that can hit people differently, and I think people who get it, and it's for them, you know what I mean? And for people who don't, they'll hopefully take away from it and want to learn more. But we spent a lot of time figuring out how are we going to have this conversation that it still has a bit of flirtation to it. It still has intimacy. You still see the sparks, but you also see two people being unafraid, or even if they are afraid, willing to confront these things about each other that they don't know or that they have assumptions about. And so I think that scene is really critical, and I think it's the one that resonates with a lot of people because it shows the reality of a relationship. You fall in love, it's joyful, it's cute, it's like head over heels, whatever, all those things that we want when we see a love story. And at the same time, our realities are we can't have partnership without those kinds of conversations, and so we're gonna have them on screen.
It was like a meet cute in Toronto. I'm like, how does that happen? Tell me. But another aspect of the film, like I mentioned at the beginning, it's kind of like loneliness and disconnect from culture, but then it's also familial loneliness as well, because I talked a bit about how you can be disconnected in your own culture, but you can be disconnected in your own family, because it's interesting that both Malaya and Conhista are separated from their fathers, and they're separated from their fathers for two different reasons, but they still have that same disconnect. And for Malaya, she has an older brother who, because his father left and the mother has passed on, he takes on the burden, but also the duty of raising her and letting her go to school, but he has to work. And there's this thing where when I was watching it, I was like, listen to him. He's telling you that he's not ready because he's in pain. And she was younger, so she doesn't have the years that he had with his parents, and she doesn't fully understand the strain of not only being the sole provider of her sister, but also being a brother. He's not a father. He didn't go into this thing knowing that I'm going to have a responsible father. He said, I'm a brother. This is not supposed to be.
I love how you watched the film. Really?
Yeah, I'm just here wow, you really watched it sensitively. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just like, girl, listen to the man. He's in pain. Stop trying to force him to reconnect with a man that he had to kind of break himself emotionally away from, because he's like, if I'm going to raise my sister, I can't dwell on the pain of my father leaving. But she doesn't get that. And What do you think was it about Malay that made her kind of like not yet? Because I could kind of relate to that from my own personal experience with my parents and my siblings. But what do you think was it with Malay where she was just not getting that that's what he was trying to say?
That's an interesting question. I think, okay, I'm going to think out loud here. The relationship she has with her brother is one that I really love and appreciate. It's very similar to the relationship I have with, or had and have with my brother. In that when you are in a first generation, second generation family and your parents are struggling in whatever way they are, you look towards your siblings and you work, you provide financially, you grow up way too soon. And that was Arun's situation. Malay too, but particularly him in terms of providing financially. I think that maybe she wasn't able to connect or understand that he wasn't ready because she saw him as like this figure, like paternal, but also a brother, a friend, her rock. So maybe that's why. But I'm trying to think a little deeper here.
Yeah, I mean, I think like even right. I mean, it's a really good question. I don't even know if I considered it. I mean, I think, to be honest, I think that's important to be. Like, I think we created a character where we knew parts of her, and I think when people ask questions, we're discovering parts of her that maybe we didn't consider. I mean, I think like you get used to it sometimes. You get used to being cared for. It's not that you are not thoughtful or you don't respect what they've done. And I think by the end, you start to see that she's seeing him as a more whole person, you know, and it's not to say she did it before, but she does in a new way, I think. And I think that's also the beauty of growth. Over time, like, if you can have these vulnerable conversations, which they slowly do, and you can address things and you can look at the complicated parts of life and not gloss over them, because sometimes life will not allow you at some point comes to head. And I think that gives room either for you to continue doing that or for you to say, maybe let's take a different route. I think it's just a matter of being maybe younger, having somebody as your rock, and then you realize your rock is also bleeding, you know what I mean? And I think that's her journey, is to understand her brother as part of her journey in the film, is to understand her brother as a more wholer person who has to do something in his own way, even if it looks different from hers, you know, and respect it.
Yeah. Do you think that them getting that kind of resolution with their father, but also this resolution with the conflict that they were having between each other, is what helped her to accept going to hostel when she came back? Because I was kind of afraid Richard was going to be like, you were not here. This is me being super dramatic and watching and she was going, you weren't here when I needed you. And I'm like, well, she needed to go home too. But do you think that's what helped her to just like take her back in when she comes back, and just be like, okay, like, I see you and I accept you for leading me, but I understand why you did it, because it's kind of this asymmetry.
Definitely. Everything that Malay had gone through, I think, put into perspective what Yosta may have gone through, and also gave her the opportunity to reflect on her own life and her own trauma in her own way. Yeah.
I think, our intention was like, sometimes you just gotta take a minute. Like, sometimes life gets in the way, and that's real, right? Like, we have other yes, we want, and especially as racialized women, right? Like, especially as, you know, Black, Indigenous, other women of color, like, I think there's like you're almost socialized to raise everybody else and take care of everyone else and be mindful of everybody else, and then adjust, and I think, and do things, be a superwoman, you know, and do everything at once. And we didn't want that. We wanted two people who were like, you know, Yosta sets a boundary, Malay has to respect it. Then Malay realizes she's actually also got to deal with her own stuff, you know. And I think when they come back together and Yosta comes back and, you know, and to complicate that idea, like, somebody didn't abandon you, they had to move forward for themselves. And the difference between, like, that's not abandonment, that's taking care of yourself and being clear about it. She was very clear, you know, and to come back and be like, I did those things and I want to apologize and I just want to tell you. And I think, like you said, Malay at that point has also done some work, and it's like, okay, let's try, you know, let's see what happens. And then we don't show exactly what happened, but we give people a taste of what could happen, you know.
I love that about the film. I remember me and Devery going over one scene, and I don't remember what scene it was, but Malay's response was, what the fuck, what do you mean? And Devery starts laughing, and I'm like, oh, sorry, that's not right. But I love how the film shows, like, healthy boundaries and respecting and honoring people's boundaries, and also taking a moment for yourself. I don't think we see that enough.
It's true. And we have time for one more question. So for the two of you, what does the title "Displaced" mean? Because I find for this film in particular, it has like many different meanings. And one of the things that struck me at the end is like in the beginning, when Debbie's character, she arrives in Toronto, she passes by this mural, and I know where that mural is too. And she passes by that mural, and like we don't get to see the flag of the 5 tribal flags, you know, the Haudenosaunee flag. But then at the end, we get to see this. We finally get to see what it is actually stopped to look at, and it was just like, to me, that this place represents like is this place Canada, this place Toronto, but also this place where we are as people emotionally, and you've arrived at this place of like not full resolution, but this place of like, okay, I can take the next step forward. And like for me, that's what I kind of interpret it as. So for the both of you, what does this place mean?
I mean, I think all of what you said is what's come up for all of us. And originally the title, I think, was Goshen, one of the writers who came up with it. I can't remember exactly who came up with everything at this point, but I know the title was her, I think, and it was this play on the word displaced, right? So yes, this place, Toronto. I love that you said it's like this place that you arrived with all your feelings. Like all of that is true, and there's also this idea of like people have been displaced to this land and this particular place being Toronto, and then people have also been displaced on their own land. And I think that like we wanted to pay homage to that experience, even though it's difficult and complicated for all of us. This idea of displacement, because so many BIPOC communities have experienced displacement in so many different regards and continue to. And so, yes, it's a play on displacement and displaced, but it's also, yes, about this place that you arrive together, this place where you meet, where you fall in love. You know, I think everyone is meeting people at different places in the film, and so it's a homage to that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I would also say or stress the idea of this place being this land that we're on. I think that's really important for people to recognize that there is a history that we need to acknowledge and understand moving forward.
And that's why the mural was so important. I do want to like just like shout out Philip who's like who's the artist of that mural, and that's why we returned to that mural so that people remember that yes, this is beautiful love story, complicated families, all of that, and like at the end of the film, also remember we're still on someone else's land.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So nice talking to you.
Such a great film watching.
It was like some of the best questions I've had so far. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sometimes I films I'm really doing interviews, I'm like, am I thinking too hard about this?
No,
I wasn't expecting it, so it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And congrats on your first festival experience.
Thank you.